The Thanksgiving meal is done, the leftovers are put away, and before the turkey coma sets in, you're thinking about Christmas movies. Well, stay tuned to This, That, and Theology as we talk about It's a Wonderful Life. You're watching This, That, and Theology, equipping you to use your worldview in the world around you. Over the next few weeks, we'll be taking a look at several classic Christmas movies, including It's a Wonderful Life, White Christmas, A Christmas Carol, although the Muppet version, and a modern classic, Elf. In 1946, It's a Wonderful Life hit cinemas, and it wasn't actually a financial success. It made about half of what it needed to be considered a success, but because of the advent of television and the fact that we could take this film and put it into people's homes, It's a Wonderful Life quickly became one of the standard Christmas movies. Since 1974, when it was able to be broadcast for free by companies, it's become the Christmas movie on television. In fact, beginning at noon on Thanksgiving Day, many TV channels are broadcasting it. And of course, you can always see it streaming from your cell phone or smart TV. But you can be sure that millions of people will watch this film. In fact, it's probably true that if you're watching this between Thanksgiving and Christmas, somebody is watching it right now. If you're not familiar with the story of It's a Wonderful Life, it follows the life of George Bailey, a bright, promising young man who constantly throughout his life chooses to help other people rather than furthering his own ambition. The film opens with hearing the prayers of an entire town for George as he's facing a critical moment. We see several celestial beings talking about how today, of all days, is the day that is defining for George Bailey, and so they're going to send the angel Clarence to give him a hand. Now, Clarence is an angel second class, and so he hasn't earned his wings yet. And just a quick moment of aside, just like we're not going to get our time travel physics from Back to the Future, we shouldn't be getting our theology about angels and heaven from It's a Wonderful Life.
Hey, that's pretty good.
We begin the story of George's life when he's just a lad of 12 in 1919, where he saves his brother's life by diving into a lake and losing his hearing because of it. This starts a pattern throughout George's life where we see him constantly giving of himself for those around him. Fast forward 10 years and George Bailey and his new wife Mary even give up their honeymoon fund, $2,000, which is a substantial amount at that time, to keep people afloat in the middle of the bank runs that happened after the stock market crash in 1929. Time after time after time, we see George sacrificing his own ambitions and his own desires so that those around him could benefit. Even working at the Savings and Loan, a job he honestly hates, he's doing it because he understands the value to his community. Time and time again throughout George's life, he puts his own desires aside for the betterment of others. Through the first hour of the film, we see this pattern of George sacrificing his own benefits for the benefits of others. By the time we get to this crisis moment on Christmas night, we actually start kind of liking George. This is a guy we might want to know because obviously the entire town loves this guy, George Bailey. On this day of excitement, after George's brother is coming home after being awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, George's uncle, who probably shouldn't be handling finances, mistakenly gives $8,000 to Mr. Potter in a newspaper instead of depositing it into the bank. And because he's somewhat absent-minded, he has no memory of how this happened. Now, before you think $8,000 isn't a huge amount, if you were to take that in 2023 dollars, we're talking about over $125,000. This will ruin George, especially since the bank examiner is there, and a discrepancy of this amount surely means ruin for George and probably jail time. In a moment, George's happy disposition, the celebration that he's having over his brother coming home, is turned to despair. He runs home, treats his wife and children horribly, goes to a bar, gets drunk, crashes his car into a tree, and then, looking out over a lake on a bridge, realizes that his life insurance would give his family and the community more money than he sees as his own life's worth. It's at this moment that Clarence drops into the scene, jumping into the water, and George, as part of his nature, goes and jumps in to save him. In a brief conversation between George and Clarence as they're drying out from their dip in the freezing water, George says that he thinks that the world might be better off if he just never existed. Clarence takes inspiration by this and grants his wish, giving George a glimpse into what the world would be like if he had never been born. Over the next half hour, we see a world that is certainly a much darker place. Because George hasn't been around to stop Mr. Potter, he now owns the town. It's called Pottersville, people's lives are universally the worst off for it. Whether we're talking about his friend Martini, Bert and Ernie, the cop and taxi driver, or most especially his wife Mary. George is horrified by the world that exists as it is. At this moment of absolute desperation, Clarence gives what is possibly the thesis statement of the film. Each man's life touches so many other lives. In another moment of desperation, George runs away, being chased by the entire town. And in a moment that should remind us of Christmas Carol's shout out by Scrooge, "I will hold Christmas in my heart," George cries out to Clarence and to God, praying that he could go back to the way things were, because he realizes just how much his life has impacted those around him. And it's at this moment that one of the most iconic scenes happen. He runs through the town, gleefully saying hello to all the things that he was just complaining about, coming home to his family to see his wife, his children, and eventually the whole town gathering around him. Because when the town heard that George was in trouble, they came from all corners, bringing literal baskets full of money to help solve the problem that had been created. At the very end of the film, we're reminded by this quote from Clarence showing up in a Tom Sawyer book found miraculously in the pile of cash: "No man is a failure who has a friend." Even though he did not have a lot of financial wealth, he was driving a rundown car, living in a house that nobody else wanted, it was a wonderful life because of the relationships he had with those around him. There's a couple things we could talk about as far as Worldview goes on this fantastic family holiday film. Clarence makes the statement in the film that we said was possibly a thesis statement. Each man touched so many other lives. The film has two people who stand on polar opposites when it comes to this idea. The first is our main character, George Bailey, who has spent his entire life giving up of himself for the benefit of those around him. Whether it's giving up his chance to go to college or not taking a job that would be beneficial, he spends his life making other people's lives better, even at the cost of his own happiness or fortune. In contrast, Mr. Potter spends his whole life acquiring financial wealth and power. He cared nothing for those around him and only wealth. In fact, there's one scene where George is confronting Mr. Potter, saying, "You have all this money and no one to share it with. You don't even have family to pass it on." Mr. Potter has sacrificed relationships with those around him for his own financial gain. The polar opposite of what we see in George Bailey in this film. A friend and pastor of mine once said that there are no neutral actions and no neutral words. You're either building someone up or you're tearing them down. George has spent his lifetime building others up, and Mr. Potter has spent his lifetime tearing them down. As we look at this film and as we think about how to talk about this movie with our friends and family, we should ask the question, are we going to be more like George or more like Mr. Potter? In our consumer society, it's very easy to look at the acquisition of goods, the newest flashy cell phone, or a new car, a new toy that you want to play with, and that goes for adults and kids as well. This acquisition of stuff as the most important thing. Or are we spending time investing in those around us? George had a loving wife, 4 wonderful children, and a relationship with those around him that was so impactful that it literally changed the course of their lives. Are you going to be more like George or more like Mr. Potter? I would wager to say that none of us actually want to be like Mr. Potter, but we do need to take that question into account, especially as we watch this film. It's a Wonderful Life is a fantastic film year-round, not just at Christmas time. As you sit down in front of your TV or in front of your iPad with your loved ones and you look at Christmas movies, It's a Wonderful Life is probably one of those that you're going to watch. There's a reason this film is considered one of the greatest films of all time. And it's perfect, whether you're in times of plenty or times of want, because it's a reminder to us of what really matters. George's self-sacrificial living should also remind us of someone who gave everything for us, who didn't take all of his wealth and power and significance as something that should keep him from loving us enough to sacrifice himself for our benefit. Of course, I'm talking about the reason for the season himself, Jesus. In the middle of our depravity, in the middle of our sin, Jesus gave of himself so that you and I could be restored in relationship to him. He gave up everything, even his very life. And if we're followers of Christ, we should continue to grow more like Jesus. And that does mean growing a little bit more like George Bailey. Even though It's a Wonderful Life wasn't designed to be a Christmas movie, it is certainly a perfect movie for the season, reminding us of what really matters. Not the stuff we get underneath the tree, but the people who have gathered around that tree. Not the meals and experiences that we may have over the season, but rather the person who came, God himself, on that night 2,000 years ago, so that you and I might have life. Jesus really is the reason for the season, and we should see him even when we're watching a movie like It's a Wonderful Life. We're going to have more Christmas movie reviews here on the channel. Make sure you've liked and subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next movie we review. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on This, That, and Theology. Happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas.
Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls! Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas, George! Merry Christmas, George!
Merry Christmas, movie house! Merry Christmas, Emporium! Merry Christmas, you wonderful old building and loan!